Steve Bowers welcoming you to Dialogue here at EPlusTV 6 and a conversation with Ivy Scarborough. Ivy's many things in his life. He is a writer. He has traveled extensively. He's been in many different countries in periods of conflict. He's a former professor of international studies at Union University. Ran for Congress, sought the Democrat nomination for Congress back in 1988. We've been talking about the campaign, and so has been actively involved and is an observer of things. Has extensive contacts throughout this world with military and security sources. And so it's always good to see you.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to talk to you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. We're doing this interview, by the way, toward the end of 2016, and we'll continue to play it because I wanted to get your perspective on things as we've kind of gone through an election. We don't know where we're headed here, and then we have a lot of troubled spots in the world, and you've been in those places. One place I wanted to begin, and I saw some photographs from Afghanistan when the Russians had occupied Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And these were schools where there were as many women as men enrolled. The women were dressing in what we'd call Western attire. They were moving into professional roles within Afghanistan, and all these other things under the Russian occupation. We were very much opposed to the occupation. You were there with the Mujahideen and all this other stuff and fought against this. But one of the points that was making is that Afghanistan, and one of the questions was raised, I wonder what happened to these people, because once Russia moved out and everybody else took over, then it reverted right back. And I guess it sets up, Ivy, the thing is, one of the difficulties in this life, in our own personal lives, you'd like to know how things are going to turn out before you make decisions,
sure.
right? And all this other stuff. When you look back on all of that, and now that the Mujahideen, when we got into 9/11 and all this other stuff, it's like, if we could rewind the tape, would we do it differently?
Well, I think so.
Okay.
I remember right after 9/11, the Adjutant General for the Tennessee National Guard asked me if I'd come up and do a briefing for his officers on their closed-circuit TV about Afghanistan, because he knew there were going to be troops, our American troops, going in there this time.
And I want people to understand that Ivy Scarborough got in there when nobody else from the West was in there. I mean, there were no reporters there.
No Americans or anybody else.
No
right.
Americans. And Ivy Scarborough got into Afghanistan with the Mujahideen. So, in one sense, on the same side with Osama bin Laden at that point.
I don't know whether I go that far, but yeah, in one sense, we were allies with what became later Al-Qaeda.
And so, yeah, it's just odd. And I interrupted your story, but I wanted people to understand the
That's all
context.
right.
You've been there.
But in any event, I told the officers that day when I was doing that briefing that if we went into Afghanistan with large amounts of troops, almost like in a conventional war, we would eventually find ourselves bogged down, and it would become not only a quagmire, but it would alienate many of the Afghan people, because they have a strong antipathy toward any foreigners on their soil.
Which is understandable, right?
Certainly.
Okay.
And at that point, we had had a wonderful relationship with them, because we had supported them during their war with the Russians, provided them with arms and other forms of support. Well, I warned that the only way to handle this war is going to be through spec ops operations and working with the indigenous forces. And that if we went beyond that, we're going to have a problem. Well, that turned out to be the case, as you can see. Right. We ended up in a situation where it seemed that our presence actually just made the war grow and grow and grow. And I think a lot of that, Steve, had to do with the traditional Afghan attitude about what they might perceive as invaders on their soil.
Okay.
If we had limited that.
Right.
So yes, what I'm saying is, in essence, we would certainly do it differently.
Because the other thing is, at one point we made a real commitment to Afghanistan, and then we seemed to shift over to Iran, Iraq, and all of that, and then got back in it. It's like we've never just totally done it one way or the other over there, and I don't know how you would do that.
Well,
that country.
That was another major mistake, the Iraq War. That shouldn't have taken place.
Okay.
And because we did that, that created a whole panoply of new problems, and it shifted the focus and the resources from Afghanistan to Iraq. And if we had stayed with the Afghans and helped them rebuild their country, I used to call it a mini Marshall Plan, like what we did after World War II with Germany. Okay. I think the Afghanistan story would be completely different today, and it would be a real triumph. But we didn't do that. We just left them with their country devastated from a war and walked away, and now it's chaotic.
Chaotic, okay. And now it's become more complicated because Iraq has become complicated. Are you, when you see this effort against ISIS and all this now, is there a feeling that there can be an Iraq again? Can there be an Iraq that is cohesive or that
Yes.
functions. And I don't know, like with the Kurds and all now, that they've had a taste of being on their own here, and I'm not sure they're going to want to give that up.
I don't think they will, and matter of fact, Steve, and I don't think they should, because of all of the people in that picture. The Kurds are the ones that I admire the most. They are remarkably courageous. They are not Arabs. They don't like to be compared with Arabs in that sense. They're just like the Afghans. Afghans were not Arabs, and they didn't like to be put in a box, so to speak, with them.
I think maybe that's one of the complicated things, Ivy, that we have, is that we kind of put all that under one big block.
Yes.
It's like Middle Eastern, and it's
Oversimplified.
Like, okay. I think we don't bother to know these people. It was almost like, I didn't realize until going even back into the 60s and 50s, I didn't realize that Ho Chi Minh was running for the presidency of Vietnam. And then we arbitrarily, I mean, we do North and South, but it's like, left alone after the French, I don't know what they would have done. It's a communist nation today, and I don't want to second guess all that, but it's like, man, it would help us if we actually knew the people that we were dealing with, and we don't seem to at times.
Well, we don't understand, and that you make a good analogy there by bringing up Vietnam. We did not understand that situation as we should have. Yeah. And when we ended up being drawn into it, of course, little by little, the effect of it was just to get more people killed with no positive outcome. You've got to be willing to stay the course. Yeah. If you take any kind of military action of any serious nature, you have got to be committed to victory. Otherwise, you should not do it. Yeah.
And it's tough to compete with people. And I look, Ted Showalter, who was in Vietnam 64, 65, was a guest a few months ago with us. And he talked about the North Vietnamese soldier, the deprivation. It's tough to beat people that are willing to to die and have no expectation of going home, live in caves or do whatever. It's tough. And I don't think we understand all that stuff.
We saw it simply in simplistic terms about communism versus capitalism or democracy. And they saw it as an intruder.
Yeah, our country. As you're talking about Afghanistan, you're in our country.
Same theme. Yeah. And when you've got that kind of motivation in an opponent, you've got a real adversary.
All right. Well, we're where we are today. We can't go back and redo any of this. So what do you look for now with the Middle East? We got Iran and Iraq, and we just deal with Iran and all that. We've got Syria, we got ISIS, and Syria's in shambles. There's still tension between Israel and everybody, and so here we go. Ivy Scarborough becomes Secretary of State. So what do you do?
Well, I would shift the focus dramatically. My focus would be on Iran. I wouldn't be sending them $400 million in different forms of bills. Okay. And I would be doing everything I could to undercut them and undermine them, because they are a true enemy, and they're a dangerous enemy. They're not as dangerous as Russia, but they are a more immediate threat probably. And I would, as far as Iraq is concerned, I would be trying to support, which I think there we're probably modulating that about right, support the indigenous forces, particularly the Kurds, and give them whatever they need to do the fighting themselves.
Hang on this thought. We're going to take this break. We'll be right back. Ivy Scarborough is with us. We'll pick this conversation up with Iran and Iraq. We'll go to Syria. So we'll get to Russia and Crimea and all that other stuff before we leave. So stay with us. This is Dialogue at EPlusTV 6. Welcome back to Dialogue and a conversation with Ivy Scarborough. If you're just joining us, Ivy Scarborough at one time was a professor of international relations at Union University. He's an attorney. He has traveled extensively in this world. He has extensive military contacts. He was in Afghanistan where there were no Westerners there. The Russians were there and the Mujahideen, and he was part of that and traveled with them and all this. So he's had, he's been in trouble spots all over this world. It's always good to talk with him. So if you're looking at the Middle East today, Iraq, we're handling okay right now, and hopefully they can go.
As best I can tell.
Okay, and then the Kurds and whatever. But Iran, you see, is the challenge.
Is the great threat.
Okay.
I would focus more there. And the most chaotic situation is Syria, of course. And that's dangerous because of the Russian involvement. I don't know where that's going to go, and it's hard to get a picture to really understand what the situation is in Syria.
All right. Well, you've been following this for a long time. So what do you see out of Russia then? Now, I mean, this has become a kind of a one-man government there. It appears, right? I mean,
they have.
This is, in essence, dictatorship too strong a word to use?
No, it's not too strong a word at all. Okay. It reminds me of that Bible verse: "The dog has returned to his vomit."
Okay.
In other words, the Russian people have now found themselves back in a situation that has been characteristic of nearly all of their history. We had this brief interval of 10 to 20 years where it looked like they were going to become truly democratic. But it didn't stay that way, and we got Putin in office, and Putin is dangerous. He is truly dangerous because he's clever and he's determined, and I believe that we're going to have some serious trouble with him. Okay. And we're not handling him well now at all.
Okay. So what do we need to do differently?
We're going to have to, with this new government, this new administration, Trump and whoever he puts in the Secretary of State's office, Secretary of Defense and so forth, they're going to have to craft new policies that are in your face, hold the line with Putin. Because if he doesn't get the message that we're going to stand up to him, he's going to continue with his behavior. Okay. Right? He hasn't gotten that message from the Obama administration. Okay. They've telegraphed just the opposite. And that's the reason why he's continuing to move forward.
What stops him then? It's just like with Crimea or whatever, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to take it, and you're going to do what?
You've got to be willing to use military force.
Okay.
You can do several things initially, such as economic sanctions and so forth, and diplomatic sanctions. But you've got to be willing to use military force. For example, one of the things that I think we made a serious mistake on is with regard to the taking of territory by the Russians in the Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine. When they asked for aid, do you know what we gave them? We sent them large shiploads of MREs. Now that's not going to do anything. Okay. That's a joke. Okay. We need to be willing to fund them and provide them with the kind of weaponry that they need to fight for themselves.
Okay. How do you prioritize it? I mean, you know, it seems when you look at the globe, people in Africa can kill each other by the hundreds of thousands, and we don't get involved in that in a real way. It's almost like, okay, that's inconsequential. What is consequential to us? When you look at this globe, if you're going to commit, because we're only going to tolerate a certain level of that unless we actually got into a world war like World War II. Probably World War II, I guess, was our last total commitment fight, right?
I think so.
Okay, where every resource of this country is targeted to that.
And Steve, that word commitment is critically important.
Okay.
Commitment in terms of our relations with other nations, commitment in our personal lives. Mm-hmm. It's one of the words that I think is often overlooked. The concept of commitment is so important. Right. Yeah. If you want to succeed and if you want to be victorious, you have to be committed.
And so you have to do it carefully. When you do it, then you have to do it. Right?
Yes, exactly.
And we have. It was almost like in our most recent wars in the Middle East. It was like, hey, don't worry, go ahead and spend money. Everything's okay. I mean, we got these people fighting over there, but we want everything to stateside to stay. We don't want to know that there's war going on. Yeah, right. That there's war going on. And it's like, well, that's not fair to either group then, because there is a war going on, right? And there are people over there they're totally committed because they're there, and we're over here going, yeah, okay, they're fighting, but don't worry, go out and spend your money for Christmas and everything else, and so that's a very different message in World War II.
Very different, and that's a critical distinction you're making, because I have been in 8 war zones now, and when I come back to the United States after being in something like that, one of the first things that hits me is the frivolity of the American people.
We don't
and
know
particularly when I have been in a situation where Americans themselves are fighting and dying, and I come home and I see this attitude of business as usual, having fun, going to the ball game, it offends me.
Okay.
And I can imagine how these soldiers would feel.
Right.
And it's not the right attitude.
So if you commit then, on what basis you make that decision? What is worth committing to?
That's a critical question.
And just like, you see Russia is still the nemesis out there for us.
Yes.
The threat.
And the way I do this analytically, Steve, is I look at the different threats as to their power and their capability, but I also look at them in terms of which is the most immediate and which is the least immediate. Okay. And for example, right now, the most immediate, I think, would be probably dealing with Iran. Then a close call would be Russia. Okay. But we've also got to think about China down the road.
I start to say that's the other thing. Because when I'm watching footage in, for example, areas that we neglect, such as Africa or whatever, there's tremendous Chinese investment going on there. I mean, it's like...
Well, they own a lot of property here in their own country.
And it's like, they're out in this world. And they seem to be now, the leadership now in China is retrenching this thing. We were on the way to capitalism, and I don't think they can turn that faucet off, but they're trying to control it as much as possible.
Well, the Chinese leadership, like most people of that type, Once they get in power, they want more power. And that means they're going to have to get rid of anything that would allow the people any say in things. This is what happened with Putin. Putin basically is trying to carry on this facade of this is democracy, but he's not, he is really making the decisions in Russia, period.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the threat, I wrote a book called Into the Night, and I said that China is the greatest long-term threat for the United States. And part of that is because, not only because of their size, but they're extremely shrewd. They're willing to be very patient. Putin isn't as patient, and his impatience is going to get him in trouble probably if he ever faces any serious opposition.
So you feel like you can stand against him and say, okay, that's as far as it goes.
Yes, I
But
think
you got to
we
mean
could.
it.
Yeah, exactly. But with China, they're waiting. They're waiting, they're watching us, and they're seeing us decline. They can see it, and they're going to take advantage of it at the right time.
One other note, because I want to come back and talk about that and talk about what we are. In Syria, these were peace protests that started, street protests, and then it just, the country disintegrates. And, and then we talked about funding moderate rebels as opposed to radical rebels and all this stuff. It just seemed we just didn't do anything that worked. And now this country is just decimated, it would seem.
Too many people saw a great opportunity for them in terms of power. That's what Russians are about. They saw an opportunity to come in here and be a major player in the Middle East by helping Assad stay in power. And Assad is desperate to keep his power. And the people, of course, are wanting to get rid of him. And frankly, he needs to go. He needs to be killed. But trying to get to that point is now very difficult.
And the country's in shambles. We've got the situation with Turkey. I mean, there's so many other things to talk about, Israel and all that over there. So it's just full. I do want to spend some time talking about us as a country. Ivy Scarborough is with us, and extensive background in travel, international relations, and all of this. An attorney here in Jackson as well. It's always a pleasure to talk with him, and we'll continue this conversation. This is Dialogue at EPlusTV 6. Welcome back to Dialogue at EPlusTV 6 as we continue a conversation with Ivy Scarborough. We talk about China. I had an opportunity to visit the Saudi Arabia about a decade ago, and it was interesting in dealing with people. These are old cultures, and you can tell, you can feel that they think totally differently.
Exactly. Yes.
And one of the comments that was made by their foreign minister, like our Secretary of State, who had been that for 20-something years, half brother of the king. He said, America has done extremely well in 200 years. He said, we'll see how it goes over the next 5. And I said, Your Royal Highness, I said, we don't think that way. I said, there's nobody in our country that goes, we're going to see how this plays out. But they manage that country in many ways, as you know. And he said, women will drive one day in Saudi Arabia, and women will vote, but it will be done on Saudi time. Yeah. And so they see this mechanism out there of stuff, and I thought, well, there's no concept of ours of how's this going to play in 500 years, and I'm going to alter my behavior today to affect something 500 years from now. There's no way in the world that we would even run that through the process. So where are we? I mean, we are a young country, and we have done extremely well. And from military tactics and everything else, the freedom and the enterprise system worked well for us in World War II and other things. So our soldiers apparently were able to improvise. If they lost all their commanders, whatever, somebody's got to do something. So you're in charge. Here we go. Right. And they're not waiting on orders from the Fuhrer or whatever. It's just like, we're going to do this, whatever we're doing. And it's been an amazing flexibility that we've had, this freedom that we've had. And it's served us well. But there are concerns about our core now. And as you say, someone such as China looks at us and say, these people are not disciplined, and all this other stuff, and they're eroding. And one of these days, that Yankee dollar is not going to run the world. And when it weakens, we're going to move in and take it, right? Right,
That's true. You said several things I agree with, and I want to affirm. The rest of the world, even parts that are not necessarily religious, for example, look at us and they look at this concept of homosexual marriage, and they think, what are these people thinking? Throughout the Arab world, that sounds very perverse. Right. In Russia also, it's regarded as still a pathological behavior, and the same in China. It's only in the Western world that you hear things like that. And when they look at us and they see things like that, and they see the frivolity, what they would regard as an obsession with pleasure and with wealth and having things, they look at that and they say these people are going to decline, and they are going to go under. We just need to be ready to take advantage of it when they do. But the two things that they have to worry about are our economy, and secondly, our military force, because those two things are something that they can't contend with right now.
Okay. I know that we looked different, and you know, when Hitler came to power, you know, he gets rid of everybody from the Jehovah's Witness to the prostitutes to the gays to the whatever. I mean, okay, and you would look at that, and many people did, and you know that many of the churches in Germany looked at this and said, this man is finally doing in this country what needs to be done. He's bringing discipline to this thing.
Right.
We also know that there were horrendous consequences of that built into that system. And I wonder sometimes, because there are many things that happen in this country where I go, man, we shouldn't be doing this or doing this or doing this. And at the same time, it's like, we are different. We do give you that flex. The assumption is that if push comes to shove, we'll come to our senses, right? And I don't know, but I mean,
that might have been an assumption at one time. I think it would have been, but I don't think it's now.
And I wonder about that, because it's like that, you know, greed and individualism and all this other stuff, and you know, we get to do what we want in this country. We're noisy and we're profane and we're whatever. You know, and somebody says, you know, but there are consequences to the other, and so I wonder how we are, and I guess until we get tested, we won't know.
Well, we're going to be tested, though. That's the pattern of history. That's going to happen.
Right. Because the same thing was felt, right, going into World War II. Who had the military? Japan had the military.
Yes.
Germany had the military.
Even more so.
You know, and we didn't have anybody.
No.
Didn't have anything.
Had less than 200,000 men in the Army.
And we go from a standing start at the end of 41 to not only winning that war, we built the bomb, beat the most brilliant scientists in the world in Germany and all this other stuff, because the feeling was just like with Hitler, right? It's like, these people are not going to get in this thing. If they do, you know. And so I don't know. If there's something in us that, you know, when you finally slap us in the face and say, okay, what are you made of? So far, we've risen to the occasion. I don't know that we will. And that's your question, right?
Well, the distinction I make is that we often talk in terms like that. Well, we beat the Germans and the Japs in World War II and so forth and so on. No, we did not.
Okay.
Our grandfathers and our parents did.
Okay.
That's a big difference.
That's a big difference. Okay.
They're on the same piece of real estate.
Real estate. Okay.
Adhering supposedly to the same Constitution. But they did it. It was their character that led to those achievements.
Okay.
We need to keep that firmly in mind.
Okay.
And there's a lot to that labeling of the
we as
greatest
children,
generation.
we as children and grandchildren are not the same kind of folks that they were.
No,
Okay.
and that's the problem.
Yeah.
We can't assume that simply because we're labeled as the United States of America and we're still holding that same piece of real estate.
That we've got the character that it takes to do
Exactly.
this. Okay. I can see that. What would your message be then to this country?
Well, my message is still, foremost, is that it's a matter of character.
Okay.
There's an old saying that character is destiny, and I believe that's true. In other words, the kind of character we have is what leads to the end of our life, what our lives will be like. And I think that's just as true of a nation as it is of individuals. And you can talk about it in religious terms, as I often do as a Christian. My faith in Christ is central to my life. Or you can just talk about it in terms of moral and ethical principles. But either way, without that, this is going to fold. And the distinction, one of the distinctions, if you want to look at it at a deeper level, is this. Okay. Christianity, like most of these concepts that I'm talking about, is founded on the notion of self-sacrifice. It's not about me. Right. It's not about what I want. It's about what I will do to help my fellow man. And that's where we're losing it. That is the fundamental point.
Because Christianity has become a lot personal, right?
Has become a lot
personal. I mean, it's like what God's going to do for me, right? Right? I'm going to get rich.
No, absolutely.
If I'm faithful.
When I watch TV sometime and I see some of these television evangelists, I'm just, it offends me.
Okay.
I have to, Joel Osteen, for example, when I see him, that guy's a heretic. He's totally unbelievable. Anybody who understood the Bible and the teachings and life of Christ would reject what he's saying, because it's all about yeah, what's God going to do for me?
Okay.
And that's not what Christ taught.
One of the best speeches I heard in my life was Lieutenant Governor John Wilder one day down at Shiloh in his halting extemporaneous style.
Could you understand him?
Yes,
I never could. Okay.
yeah, I could that day. Because he talked about there and he said, you know, there's no Social Security, no veterans benefits, no whatever. 600,000 people die in this war, right? Out of a population of 30 million people, right? Talking about the Civil War, you know. And he said, that was commitment and sacrifice.
Yeah, it was.
With no holds barred. And I thought about it. He said, on either side, when you look at that, why did they keep doing that? There was something that they had. They were different people.
That's
different
right.
People. And I thought that
True.
was a profound thing. It's always good to visit with you.
Well, it's always good to be questioned by you. As I've said to you off camera, you are very astute in your questions, and you're very good at connecting these events in our world.
I appreciate getting your perspective. I thank you for the time.
Glad to do it.
Ivy Scarborough with us. You stay with us here at EPlusTV 6 because this is the place where the dialogue continues.